code review only to get 200 comments and endless discussions in these PRs. So maybe you wonder what's the reason of this kind of big PRs and why it's happened that such big PRs are happening. And what's often the problem, it's getting worse. I mean, when you are waiting ages for PRs to be merged, it's creating some kind of death loop, let's say.
It's even worse over time.
It's get even worse because if you know that you'll wait ages for merging a PR, you are just making them bigger because you know that if you prepare 10 smaller PRs, you will wait longer for those PRs. Today, in this live podcast, we'll discuss what are the problems that are causing that PRs are big and some strategies that we used in our teams to make those PRs merged much faster. So by much faster, I mean how to create PRs that are merged within a day. So let's imagine a scenario when you are starting to work on some task in the morning and it's merged by the end of the day. Sounds like a perfect world that doesn't exist, but our experience is a bit different.
Can be possible. So this is our last live episode, so feel free to leave comments in the chat. I will pick them up during the discussion, or at the end we'll have a Q&A section. So maybe let's kick off with why we need to review code at all.
Yes, I think it's important to start with the fact that code review, a lot of people are treating code review as gatekeeping. So basically to ensure that changes that are not expected are not merged. And I think it's bad. It's a bad sign if code review is kind of gatekeeping. So from my experience, if code review is gatekeeping, it usually means that you didn't make a good job earlier on agreeing how things should be implemented. So it's a matter of some good practices in the team, but it's also a matter of designing things. So in other words, if you spend time earlier on planning that, it should be not a surprise what's in the PR.
So if someone opens a PR and they start wondering what exactly it is about, then maybe it's too late. Maybe they don't have enough context, and they won't know enough to review it in a reasonable pace. I sometimes heard of people starting PRs with checking out the code and running the application and just trying to understand what's going on. So I think we can agree this should be an anti-pattern, unless something unexpected happens, like your team is busy with something else. I don't know. You ask someone else from outside the team to review your code. But yeah, most of the time you should know you should know beforehand what the PRs will be about.
So if it's the case,
in the perfect world,
that can exist, but we'll go into that a bit later. But if gatekeeping is not the reason why you are doing code review, so it should be some reason why you are actually doing code review. And from my perspective, one of the most important reasons why you are doing code review is the knowledge sharing. And I think it's not mentioned very often, and I think it's some kind of hidden advantage that maybe we don't think that often. But this knowledge sharing is important because when you're doing review, you're doing some kind of, you're learning how something is implemented, and it's helping to spread this knowledge how something is implemented in the team. And it's pretty important because if you're spreading this knowledge, it's easier later to extend this functionality by more people in the team, because
you know where to look for the changes if you need to extend them or implement your own feature.
And while usually it's not the best idea that one person have some area in the code and just this person is touching this code, well, I've seen it sometimes in my life, and okay, while in short term it can be good strategy because this person really knows how this code works, but at some point it may not scale if it will be more functionality to implement there. And the problem starts to be, a problem at this time.
Yeah. Also depends how big your team is, right? Like for for smaller teams, it's probably optimal because if you have a small PR, everyone can take a look and have a rough idea what you are doing. Bigger teams, probably it's a bit more complex because not everyone can see each PR in progress.
Definitely, but still, if you have bigger team, you can. I mean, we're not talking about, for example, 5 people, because I think if you have 5 people, it's a bit easier to share this knowledge and be in the stage that everybody knows what's done. But for example, if you have 15 people, it's a bit harder, and obviously it doesn't make sense to knowledge share for everybody. But I would say that if you have some subset there, it makes much more sense.
I sometimes see people mention code reviews are a sign of lack of trust in the team. You don't trust your teammates because you need to review the code they write. So I think it's funny because I find it the other way. So I actually trust them to review my code because I don't try to trust myself enough to know I don't make any mistakes. So it's good to have another pair of eyes. Just take a glance, and very often they will have some context you missed. If we had no comments on PRs, we would stop doing them, right? But they come useful.
In other words, you should not look on PRs like gatekeeping, but rather something positive that can help you to improve your stuff. And I think it's also important that it shouldn't require from you to from the reviewer to verify the changes, because I also heard that some teams were doing it like that somebody is doing review and verifying if it's worked properly. I think it's probably more your responsibility to ensure that this functionality that you implemented, it's working.
Sounds a bit like QA, but anyway, you should be doing QA on your own code. So, all right.
But yeah, I think let's maybe start with why having big PRs is a problem. Because I think if you are working with software, most of people will agree that it's big elephant in the room, that big PRs are a problem. But I think a lot of people are not doing anything about that. It's like, big PRs are bad, but whatever.
Or they just say out loud, okay, guys, let's not do it again.
Let's don't do big PRs.
But then it always happens. For me, the first one is like the most obvious one. It's just hard to review, right? So it's like it's a well-known phenomenon that if you have a small PR, people will find like 3 defects. But if you have a huge PR, they will just write LGTM and yeah, I think we know this pain well. Like it's very easy to just glance at a huge change set and not go very deep into the details.
Obviously, we're losing in this scenario the knowledge sharing that we mentioned at the beginning. Because if you have 3 huge PR, there is no way that you'll read that and that you'll be able to learn from that how it works.
Yeah, exactly. And then everything all the processes like reading, understanding the code, comments, and whatever else goes on in the PR just take longer. And no one likes long discussions, especially asynchronous. So if you take a huge PR and then on top of this you have like 50 comments, that will take ages to review. And and if someone spent 2 weeks or longer working on this PR and then you drop 20 comments on it, they are probably not eager to listen to what you want to say, your suggestions.
You're just thinking, I would like to get it out as soon as possible.
They just want to be done with it and push it through to prod. So it's probably not encouraging to changes. It becomes kind of like an artificial review process, but doesn't give you much.
So probably in this case, it wouldn't change much if we would not have any pull review. That just we can push to mine and
exactly.
Fine. Yeah, and another problem with big PRs is that, as you said, when you have the situation when we're working on this PR for longer time, it's a big chance that you receive 20 comments, and okay, it depends on the team, but usually it may end up with big rework of the job that you'd made. So in other words, you will lose a lot of time on writing this code, and you will lose a lot of time on rewriting it later.
And you are very late in the process because someone spent already a week or two writing it, and now if you want to rework it now, it probably will be a huge change.
And even worse, probably in the meantime, when you were working on that in your basement, people were doing other changes, and you probably will have a lot of conflicts. And it's even more funny if other person in the team have PR like yours, and this person merged it earlier. Okay, if you are not a lot of people in the team, you can always not review this person's PR, so you are safe that it will not introduce conflicts. But you see the problem, so the conflict of interest. I mean, it's also problematic for you if other person is merging some big PR, so you are not doing review for this person because it's straight for your PR. So
or you're raised to do it first, so you don't need to deal with conflicts.
Or you can add a lot of comments, so this person PR will be also blocked, so you can merge your PR first.
Yeah. And then, when the conflicts happen, you think you get an approve and you think it's ready, and then you just need to resolve the conflicts. And 2 hours later, you are finished, but it takes time. You could do something more productive. So just spend time on maintaining this PR instead of writing code. And this merging can also introduce new bugs or changes that no one reviews, so it's another risk. There's also like a longer feedback loop, right? Because this communication is asynchronous in the comments, so someone gets sick or has days off, you need to wait for them, they come back, they lost some context. We need a separate discussion about all of this. And also there's this paradox that people might think that small PRs require context switching, because you have to very, very often review code and review what you are doing. But in reality, big changes are even worse because of this. Because you need to, every time you come back to it, you need to refresh this huge context in your mind instead of something very small. So that's another one. And also, if you want to stack PRs, so if you want to branch out of an existing branch because you need the changes in there, which is often useful. With small PRs, it's quite easy to do, not risky. But with big PRs, you block everything until the big PR gets merged. So.
And later you have PR that depend on PR that depend on another PR. And if the first PR in the chain will need to be changed largely, it's just a horror to keep it up to date. So I have PTSD if I think about such PRs.
and then someone asks when this will be done, and you say, we only need to wait for Robert's PR to be merged. We've been waiting for 2 weeks now, so any moment. Yeah, I think we've seen it too many times. And other ideas. This lack of visibility is also risky, because if you don't know when the feature will drop because a PR takes so long to merge, you might be tempted to use estimates, which is also problematic. But this comes from the fact that no one knows when something will happen. You have this huge PR which seems almost ready to merge, but things keep being added to it and discussed, and you just never know when is the finish line. And the worst of all, you can create a long living branch, like one that takes 3 months or so to merge, and it's a completely different version of the software. keeps living in parallel. Yeah, if you ever work with this, probably don't want to do it again.
Yep. So it all sounds bad. So, I mean, there are multiple reasons why we should not do big PRs, but from our other side, for some magical reason, still, from my experience, having big PRs is very often the problem in multiple teams. And there are a couple things that I believe are creating big PRs. And again, I think it will be mentioned multiple times in this episode that, in my opinion, we very often have good intentions, but despite that, the problem still occurs. And the same is with big PRs. So I think that's why it's important to be conscious about what can cause big PRs. So I think one of the things that is coming to my mind at the beginning is that we have some kind of complete feature mindset. We like to create a feature and have it work on production ASAP. So it makes sense that we're working on something and it's just nice when you write that and it's going directly to the production. And it sounds good, but unfortunately, often features are not that simple that we can easily implement it within one PR. So if we'll try to do that, okay, maybe someone sometimes will estimate that, yeah, it's just 1 day of work. But how often you think that something is 1 day of work and it's ending up with the week of work because there is some hidden complexity that you didn't take into consideration at the beginning. So,
and splitting it seems like additional work. So you might be tempted to avoid it. Just do it in one go. Should be easier, right?
Yeah. And I think it's connected to planning. That in many cases, when we'll discuss about causes why we have big PRs, it's connected to how we plan things, how we did some shortcuts maybe with planning. And I think often big PRs are connected to some surprises that we are creating. So what I mean by that is that
so-called missed requirements.
Yes. And
so if we don't know some edge cases before we start the work, and then you in progress of working on a PR, you discover something new. You have to stop, maybe discuss with someone else, and then it starts to get tough to push through because you put some work, you started some writing some code already. It's like half done, but something blocks you.
Yeah, and obviously, if you include something like that in the PR, if somebody will be reviewing that, it will be kind of surprising. Even if you have some planning process at the beginning, if some person is reviewing your PR, this person might be basically surprised. I mean, okay, we're planning this, but why this PR have this, and this? Yeah? And this is triggering discussions. And discussions is triggering slowdown of PRs, basically.
Yeah. Sometimes, if PRs get reviewed slowly in general in your team, you may think like, it makes no sense to. Oops, what happened?
Our camera died.
Yeah, so let's maybe take a minute break.
Today we have a lot of unexpected stuff. So this episode is special in a couple dimensions because the first fact is that our room that we usually are using is used, so we were not able to use that, and our camera is overheating. So
Summer is there.
Summer is there.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as I said before,
What you see? It's live. It's not pre-recorded.
So if your PRs get reviewed slowly in general in your team, you might think like, okay, it makes no sense to create additional PRs because I will wait for all of them for a long time to be reviewed. So maybe let's just make a bigger one and review it once. But again, then the huge PR gets reviewed even slower. So it's not a good solution really. And yeah.
And I think it's also one anti-pattern that I often see. So it's the teams that are not real teams. So what I mean by that is that, if you have a couple developers that are independently working on some features, they are actually not a team. So there are a set of individuals working on something. And at the end, there is no shared responsibility to deliver some features. So if you have no shared responsibility to deliver features, it's hard to convince somebody to review your PRs, basically, because nobody cares.
Right. It's not their job. Yeah.
Yeah. My job is to implement my features and review.
I don't want to spend time on your work because I'm responsible for mine, and there are stakeholders waiting for my work to be done.
Exactly. And I think it's a big problem because if you are not working as a team but set of individuals, well, there is no pressure or nobody feel obligated to review stuff.
Yeah, so in this case, review is not the team's responsibility, but basically no one's responsibility. You just beg people to do it for you. That sounds like an issue. You can see the setup when there's a feature mentioned and some stakeholders know to which developer to talk to about it, because they are seen as the kind of like owners or masters of this area. And this is one of the indicators, I think, that this happens.
Yeah, so we already covered a couple reasons why having big PRs is a problem and how big PRs happen. And I'm not sure if you agree with me, but I think one of the most important parts here is, and reasons for them, is lack of planning, basically. Maybe I would say deep enough planning. So I like phrase that 5 days of coding can save 1 day of planning. And I think it's often true. And it's often a problem in multiple teams. I mean, we as developers, engineers, we like to solve problems with the code. So if we hear about planning, meetings, it's always like
talk to people.
Talking to people, especially non-developers. We are pretty allergic to that,
especially if after you hear about the feature, you already have database schema in your mind. You already know how to solve it. So all you need to do is just sit down and write.
Yeah, and I kind of understand why people are allergic to deep planning, but from other side, I think it's also creating a lot of problems, and often it's visible in code review, because I think a lot of people are blaming code review process for many things, like code review is such bad, it's such a big waste of time, it's taking that much time. But I think in previous episodes we also sometimes had this let's say non-direct visibility of some errors. So for example, some people are blaming DI for making complexity of the applications because dependency injection is so complicated, etc.
Right. So it's like the tip of the iceberg. You think it's the issue, but underneath there's some more complex issue.
And I think it's a similar case with code review. So a lot of people blame code review for a lot of bad things, but I think it's just surfacing other problems that you have in the team. So for example, if you have, I don't know, 200 comments in the code PR that you submitted, it's Maybe a good question to ask. Okay, why you have 200 questions there?
Yeah.
Why you didn't agree on that earlier before you start the implementation? Because when it's already implemented, reverting that, changing that, it will be super expensive. If you spend more time a bit earlier during planning and plan it properly, probably you'll waste much less time. And I think it's not about always planning everything for 100% to not have any unexpected complexity, because it will always happen. And trying to plan that accurately, it will be super expensive in terms of time. But I think it's, from our experience, we see that spending this more time on planning, it can definitely.
It's easy to change the whiteboard,
Mm-hmm.
to erase it and rewrite it. It's much harder to change a 10,000 lines long PR with 100 comments. So the earlier you discuss things and agree on how to do it, then the easier you will be to iterate on this.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of people are like, let's skip planning, let's just write that and ship that, and it will be everything fine. And I know that I was also like that when I was younger and less experienced, but later you can kind of learn that, okay, it can give you some acceleration at the beginning, let's say, but later it can be very problematic because, again, you lose many of the advantages that you will have from this code review, like knowledge sharing, or if you are doing kind of more strict process of code review, it will be just blocking at some stage, because this ship it approach, it will be at some point probably will go with some strange direction that you didn't agree with somebody else, and it will be just surprise in the PR, the surprise that we were mentioning a bit earlier. And again, PRs shouldn't be surprising, so it should be implementation of what you agreed on high level earlier.
Yeah, so it's another paradox that you think you save time on planning, but in the end you spend even more time on the reviews. Just like with the paradox of context switching, when you think smaller PRs cause context switching, but actually the big PRs cause even worse.
And yeah, I think it's interesting because on the first side, you might think that, yeah, splitting to multiple PRs, it will just add a lot of overhead, and it sounds non-logical to have multiple PRs instead of one big. But I think what I can recommend is trying to try using smaller PRs and see how different it will be. Obviously, it requires team culture that supports that, because okay, if you create 10 smaller PRs and nobody will review it kind of immediately, it will not help, and you cannot do much about that, and probably you will end up with big PRs at the end anyway, because it will just start to stack. So yeah, it wouldn't make sense, but we'll go into that, what you can do in the team to encourage teammates for quick review. So yeah, we started to mention that missing of enough planning obviously can help to create bigger PRs. But again, it's also important to not go into extreme, because I think it's also easy to go into really extreme, try to plan for everything, to go really deep into the planning, but it will be very expensive to do. So I think it's probably not possible, even because without touching the code, it's really hard sometimes to find all edge cases and complexities that you have.
Yeah, so the balance is in deciding what you want to agree on. So, for example, we skipped on most implementation details like exact database schema or some naming of things. That was up to the implementer most of the time. But high-level architecture, like what endpoints do you want, or what services this impacts, and so on. Some very high-level picture of it. That's super useful to have early.
Yeah, so I think it's all about this non-surprising PR at the end. So to think what you should plan earlier to not surprise the reviewer when you are reviewing that. And it's if you were not working like that earlier, obviously it will take some time to learn how to do that. But I think it's a skill that you are just getting with time. So you're implementing more, you're learning more how. Okay, this is surprising somebody in the PR. Okay, maybe we should raise it during planning.
Next time, let's agree what on endpoints they will be exposed, which is this is a quick discussion, right? For sure, better to have before any code is written. Like, do we want endpoint in this service, or do we want a message handler in this service, something like that? That's high level. That can take 5 minutes, but after someone implements it, it can then take 1 hour to revert and replace.
Yeah, and
or even worse if the discussion is asynchronous.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that it's worth doing is also including in the planning discussion some product person, let's say. So it depends on each company how it looks like, but often you have some maybe not stakeholder, but maybe some product owner or product manager or whatever, and it often may be helpful. So obviously it's required not to have some discussions that are not super technical because this person will be just bored and this person will not understand anything.
So do it first, right? First understand the product.
Feature,
and then discuss the code.
But I think it's nice because it also can help to cut scope a lot. So I remember that often when we were doing it like that, so we included product people in during the planning phase. So when we have some planning meetings and we have this product person in the meetings, it sometimes helped a lot to simplify scope a lot because we started to discuss some features, but we had like, but okay, it will be super complicated because this and this. And the person in the same room said, oh, okay, so if it's complicated, we can just skip that because it's not that important. And sometimes you can lose hours as a developer to try to figure out some super complex problem that at the end, nobody will care that much. So
I think it's one of the most important skills for product engineering, and I think it's super rare as well. Because most developers, when they get a clear description of a problem from a stakeholder, will just say, okay, you can do it. Because they want to be the hero and show, and we've been like this.
And we are problem solvers, So if we see problem, okay, we need to solve this problem. It will be so cool.
Especially if it's well defined. Like you have all the requirements and so on. You might be eager to just jump into it, and you will tell them, okay, we can do it tomorrow, no problem. They will be like, yeah, guys, you are the best team in the company. But then you get stuck on these complexities, and you need to talk to the stakeholders again, and it takes super long time to revert everything. So I think it's super important skill to be able to pull them early to the discussion and see where you can cut the scope, or even if it's not out of scope entirely, just find the V1 you want to deploy. And that's super useful to have.
Yeah, and I think we're often kind of missing this, that we are implementers of some external requirements, and again, we're trying to be heroes, but
or I am just a developer. Tell me what to do, and I will do it. So that's a common approach, and it often ends terribly because you can just trust people know what they want. You need to help them figure out what exactly it is they want.
So basically, one unexpected strategy to make your PR smaller: implement less things.
Or start with less. That's maybe more precise. Try to start with the small scope.
But sometimes it's not possible. I mean, sometimes we'll ask product master or camera light again. So, okay, can we simplify that? No, you cannot. So what's the strategy in this case?
I guess breaking down changes, right? So our ideal scenario would be having PRs that are implemented within 1 day. Right. So as you said at the start, if someone posts a PR in the morning, it is merged on production in the afternoon, something like this. The cycle time will be ideal. And there are actually some strategies you can use. And like probably the simplest one is to merge code that's not ready yet behind the feature flag, right? So, but it's critical you are able to manage feature flags in your project one way or another, even if it's just some configuration. But it allows you to merge the PR, so it's already on production, even if not used. But you avoid this discussions and conflicts and so on. You just work on the code that's already on the main branch, even if not exposed yet. And you can have the tests running. You can enable it on some pre-production environment. You can show it to stakeholders in some very early form, some MVP form, and get some early feedback from them. So that will be my number one for breaking down changes and for small PRs.
Yeah. Another thing that comes into my mind, it sounds pretty obvious, but basically to have some discussion, to some RFC, ADR, some design document, and basically discuss it with rest of your team and have some plan how we can split it to some smaller parts.
Mm-hmm.
So we already mentioned it multiple times. So I think this magical value is one day that I know for so many people it sounds like no, it's not possible to start implementation in the morning and merge something by the end of the day and not working until midnight. I mean, I know that for some people it sounds crazy, but it's very possible.
Yeah,
and it's not.
I remember having 5 minutes cycle time with PRs because if it's small, you can just ping someone and then take a look, and in 10 seconds you get an approve.
And rest of the people is aligned because you spent some teamwork to discuss how it should be implemented, and it's not surprising for people. So somebody can take a look quickly on that, see, yeah, it's what we discussed, looks great, merging,
yeah. and because it's merged for the next PR that's built on top of this, those changes are already out of context, so you don't spend time discussing them. That's a huge win.
Mm-hmm. So do you have maybe some tips from our experience how you can split this work to make it working nicely?
Yeah, so you can either split vertically or horizontally, and both kind of make sense. Probably vertical makes more sense at first. So instead of big chunks of the feature, you deploy small parts of it. So for example, you can let's say if you build a dashboard or something like that, you can deploy just one chart or one button, and the endpoints behind it and so on. So it's something you can deploy, for example, on staging environment or even on production, and show it to your stakeholders and ask them, is this what you want? It can be very simple feature, part of the entire feature, but it's already something you can ask me about.
Yeah, and I think you can go even one step further. So because you can have some vertical slice to prepare chart, but often those vertical slices of entire functionality, it can be still pretty complex. So you can also slice this vertical slice horizontally.
Yeah.
For example, have separate task for SQL repository.
Yeah.
So it works pretty nicely with clean architecture that we've been discussing in the previous episode. So I recommend it to check it out. But long story short is that it helps pretty nicely with splitting these features layer by layer. So it can be implemented by one person or by multiple people, and you can implement. Again, it's important. It's good for more complex features because for some features it doesn't make sense to split that because it will be just useless overhead. But if it's more complex feature, let's say that I don't know it's 1 week work for one person, you can always split it by layer. And for example, every person in the team can take one layer. And instead of implementing something for an entire week, you can have 5 people that are just have separate slices with agreed API layer, and it can be even implemented within a day. And it's cool because you can show it to some stakeholders after this day and ask, okay, this is something what you asked? No? Okay, so let's iterate on that. And it's much, much, much faster.
Yeah, I think it's another superpower that's very rare in tech teams in general, to be able to work in parallel on a single feature. Because more often you will find this approach of, okay, so this person is responsible for this feature. See you again in 2 weeks on the sprint demo.
And usually it's not 2 weeks because there are some challenges or blockers.
So instead, if you can agree on the interfaces, then one person can implement the HTTP handler, the other one the message handler, the third one the database adapter, something like that. And it's quite simple because you agree on the interfaces first and then you implement them. So it's really straightforward, and we know it works because we've seen it live.
And we have some comparisons. It was a process that we work over a time, and we have comparison how it worked earlier when we were not doing splitting, and later when we did the splitting. And we were able to iterate that fast, and it was cool.
Except both vertical and horizontal splitting is not that easy to come up with. Maybe the horizontal is easier because it's a technical one, but the vertical split is related to product, so you need some product sense to understand which features make sense alone, and you need to discuss it with someone probably to understand better.
Oh no, talking to people.
Yeah, so I think it's worth doing. I'm just saying I think it's rare because it's not trivial. You need some effort from the engineers to do it.
But after you will learn that and the team will learn that,
then it's quite natural. Yeah, for sure you can learn it. Entire teams can learn it, and then, it will be the best if, side note, if there's no single team lead doing this, but it's encouraged so everyone can own this with time.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's another we again see the same pattern, that it's some kind of overhead myth here, that you may think that okay, cutting it by horizontally and vertically, it's that much overhead for that it sounds logical, that in theory it will require more time, but from the other side, if you will not cut that and one person will implement that, for some magical reason it will take longer anyway at the end, even if there is some overhead by cutting that. But if only one person is implementing that, this person may be bored, may have other interruptions, context switching. So at the end, there is also some hidden cost of one person doing all entire work for 2 weeks. And if you add all the complexities that we mentioned with the splitting, non-splitting PRs, but having one big PR instead, it's starting to be much, much, much harder and take much more time. And it at the first sight, it may sound like it's requiring much more effort, but I recommend to check that, because after you see that, you can see that in practice, it's much, much faster to implement things. But you may think that, okay, it all sounds nice, but it's not possible to split all functionalities that are maybe okay. With functionalities, it's a bit easier. You can probably split most of them, but sometimes there may be some work that it's not possible to split. And the first thing that I have in mind is some kind of big refactoring. So if you're doing some big refactoring in a project, sometimes it may be hard to split that. So I like to compare it to Fatality from Mortal Kombat. So, it's like you're getting backbone and, it's getting all the bones with that.
So there are lots of unknowns and you just don't know what you will find.
Yeah, but I also mean that sometimes touching one thing is creating some kind of domino effect. So you touch one thing, but to make it working, you need to adjust a lot of things in the project, and it's some kind of atomic change at the end. So you can, if you touch that, you probably need to spend 1 week to just fix everything. And it's, I think, also a pretty interesting case how to deal with that, because okay, this one person can do this big refactoring for a week or 2 weeks, later give a PR and guys, can you review that, because it's important refactoring. If we're looking at okay, 2 weeks of work, 2,000 files changed, 200,000 lines of code added, the same removed. Okay, good luck with reviewing that. So one of the tactics here may be, okay, sounds good, let's merge that. But I think it's not the best, because usually it can end up with some strange changes in the code base, and everybody later will be maybe not surprised in the PR, but surprised if somebody will be implementing something like that. So, do you have some examples from our teams? What we did in such scenarios to avoid this? I think probably it happened to us multiple times to do this big PR and close eyes and okay, let's merge that, whatever. But I think it maybe wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't the best strategy.
You can try mob programming.
Sounds like a plan.
If you're brave.
So, what is mob programming? Because I think a lot of people may not know mob programming. So maybe some of you know what pair programming is, but mob programming, I think it's much more exotic.
Yeah, it's pair programming, but with more than a pair. So it's basically a group of people coding together, and one person is the driver with the keyboard, and the rest comment and observe. So very similar to pair programming, except there's the entire team, if it's small enough, like 5 people, let's say. And and you take turns coding, and you implement the feature together.
Sounds like a big waste of time, isn't it?
Yeah, like all meetings. I think we should all code alone, not discuss it.
In basements.
So for many, well, maybe not for many, but for some kinds of work, this can work well because of the knowledge sharing primarily. So you don't need to waste time reading PRs, especially if they are big, because you do some refactoring or scaffolding of the project and so on. Instead, you do it together. So for sure, it doesn't make sense to do everything like this, because if you implement an HTTP handler, there's probably no need for 4 people to watch how you do it. But if it's some critical domain code or some huge refactor, it's probably quicker this way than if everyone reads the PR separately and comments.
I think it's probably good to consider alternatives if you are thinking that it's waste of time, because okay, what are alternatives? So you can probably just close eyes and merge these big refactoring PRs. That it's some solution, but usually it doesn't end up well. Sometimes, okay, you can the person that created this big PR can arrange some meeting and show some highlights of how this feature or refactoring was done. It's probably a bit better, but still, it's no way that you can go over entire thinking process that you did in 1 or 2 weeks of development.
So you need to consider if it makes sense.
But do you have maybe some tips how to run mob programming sessions to keep it efficient? Because you have entire team in the room, potentially maybe on the call. I think it's harder. I mean, I think it's easier to do it in person, but
everything is harder on the call. So watch out. But if you do time box rotations, that should help. So make sure there's no one person coding, but you switch seats.
Yeah, I think it's very important, because it's easy to end up with a situation when one person, sometimes some team lead or whatever, is coding everything and everybody is looking on their phones, probably not on the code, because it's.
So you need to keep everyone engaged, basically, so they don't slip away. Watch out for CO2 levels in the room if you use a room. make sure your team knows the process and everyone is aligned. So, for example, a big risk is if you let people drift into off topic and just start discussing every line in the code, that can end up terribly. So I think it works best if your team is like have been working together for a while and they know each other. And I remember we had sessions with some new joiners to the team, and that wasn't going that well because they were not aware of some patterns we were using, and just, they questioned everything.
Yeah, so I think it's good to have some facilitator. So
exactly, yeah. You need some heavy facilitation.
Can cut discussions. And I remember that what often works for us was that, okay, if we're parking some discussions, so sometimes we left a task for that, and this task could be done asynchronously because, again, running a team with entire session for entire team is just expensive in terms of time, basically. And you need to be sure that you are using this time very efficiently.
So sometimes you can also do it like a short session just to start a project. I remember when we started new services, we use mod programming where we just bootstrap the project or something like that.
Yeah, and it was pretty cool because we had really nice boost at the beginning, so everybody was aligned how it was implemented, and it was speeding up work at the beginning very, very much because, again, it's also the theme that is going over and over during this episode, so knowledge sharing. So this very deep knowledge sharing that actually accelerates the work a lot because you may have multiple tasks to implement. Everybody knows how everything else in the project works, so everybody can pick up the task, and tasks are not blocked because, for example, this task can be unimplemented by somebody. No, everybody can take that, everybody can review that, and it's accelerating work a lot. So that's kind of hidden functionality of that, let's say. But yeah, it can help a lot. And yeah, this is also the same with mob programming. So basically you can mob program the feature at the beginning of the project and later iterate really, really fast.
So maybe we can talk about code review culture, going back to the topic.
Yeah, because I think it's pretty important because a lot of ideas that we have here, it requires some nice culture in the team because, again, you can do small PRs, but if nobody will review them, it's pointless because you end up with waiting for ages for the reviews, so it will be not helpful. So what do you have in mind from our experience? What are the important traits of the team that have high code review culture?
Maybe what we mentioned before, like make it a team responsibility, not individual responsibility. So the team is responsible for delivering the entire feature or product, right? So anyone should be able to review code for knowledge sharing. Just avoid these silos where people are closed in their own kind of parts of the code and they know everything about it, and no one else is able to suggest changes there.
And by everybody, we mean that, okay, if you have 15 people team, so maybe not entire team, but let's say that you can have some, okay, it's really problematic if your team is 15 people.
I guess it's ideal if you have 2 or 3 people working on a single feature at a time and they can review each other's code.
But no, I would even say that maybe 5. 5 is also, it's also good because you can have some extra capacity for that. And it's number out of nowhere, but
but I mean it's probably anti-pattern to have one person responsible for all the reviews. So like the leader with the gray beard who knows everything, and everyone just asks them to review their code. That's probably not what you want because this person becomes a bottleneck.
It's also not good when you have your buddy, for example, that is doing your reviews because, okay, it's a bit better because it's not in hands of one person. By the way, I think many of you may not know the Phoenix Project book, but there was I don't remember the name, but it was covering similar situation of one person that was the person that known everything, but it was also a bottleneck at the end. So it's very similar situation.
Yeah, I would usually just ask the person who has more experience in the area than I have, so they can give you some insights that you might not know.
Or maybe just have a team channel and and pick up it, and
that's the best times I remember when we just what I mentioned about the 5-minute cycle time is when you just post a PR, post a link to some Slack channel, and then you get an approve or comments 10 minutes later. That's my ideal working condition.
Yeah, and really, it's possible. It requires times and good culture.
But I think the main concern here is context switching. But once again, switching context to a 50-line long PR is something completely different than 500 line
or even
PR.
200 lines. I mean, it's also something that you can review pretty quickly. So.
Yeah, I just mean the size in general. Like if it's in tens of lines, hundreds of lines, probably still kind of fine. But if it's thousands, then probably someone will open it, and then they will go for a coffee break or back to their own code, and we'll just make a mental note to come back to it later. And if it's 50 lines or 100 lines, they can just read it in 1 minute and tell you what they think.
Yeah, and I have actually one thing in mind when we're discussing that one of the problem with the discussion that we have now is that having this having everything working require multiple things. For example, if one thing doesn't work, it can break the good PR flow. So for example, if it takes ages for people to pick up PRs, so everything else can be problematic. So it's important that to not pick some parts of this, but try to improve it from multiple angles. Okay, going back to the strong code review culture. So other thing that it's maybe also not obvious is actually how we are doing reviews. So I have two things in mind. So the first is the feedback culture and feedback mindset. So you should not treat this as so you should not take this code review feedback personally, let's say, because I think it's often that people are looking like, oh, somebody commented on my code, I'm so stupid, and this person is also stupid because it doesn't like me or whatever. So try to avoid that and try to separate that. This is the code, this is you, and this is separate thing. And it's also always good to assume good intentions, because it's easy to go into direction like, somebody is commenting on that, he would like to make my life harder, and why he's doing that. And I think it's very rarely true. So most often it's that actually somebody cares on the other side, and this person would like to create code that is maintainable and easy to work with. So I think it's important to start with mindset by default that the person on the other side have good intentions. So this person cares, and this person would like to just have nice code. Obviously, sometimes it's going into extremes. Sometimes person can have also some bad intentions, but it's more about the default approach. So I think by the default, and it will be probably true in 80% or 90% cases, that people have good intentions.
Yeah, unless they nitpick.
Yeah, and nitpicking, and I think it's another problem. So if you don't know what nitpicking is, so there are all those comments like, okay, it's not important, but maybe you should use spaces here or change how it's formatted to a different.
Can you order the variables alphabetically?
yeah, and all those comments that are.
It's basically, I would like this code to look like this. but you do it differently.
So you can resolve this comment. I don't mind. But yeah, so this is nitpicking, long story short. And in my opinion, if I do any code review and I think about adding a nitpick, I don't do that, because if it's not that important that it's not required for merging, it doesn't make sense actually to add any comment, spend other person time on resolving that or maybe addressing that, because it's just not important enough. And in my opinion, all those nitpicks, it should be covered by the linter basically. So if you have some styling requirements, just put linter for that and not spend humans time.
Because they are often cosmetics. So linter is good at catching that.
Exactly. And linter have also one nice feature that it have pretty quick feedback loop. Because if you are leaving a comment in the PR, some person will read it with some delay, this person need to address that. It's just a lot of wasted time. And with linter, you're just running linter. You can see in worst case, couple of seconds later, in best case, in less than 1 second, that okay, everything is fine, or what should be fixed. You can format that and it's fine. So I think this is how it should be solved with nitpicks. So if something is that important enough to check for that, fine, let's put linter for that and linter will ensure. If it's not important, why to do that?
Yeah, that makes sense. Also, as the person submitting the PR, you can do some things to make it easier. So something I like to do is being my first reviewer, so just checking the change set, and often you will find some leftovers. So instead of someone commenting it for you, you can just do it yourself. Just make their job a bit easier, and they can also include a short description, like why you did something. Or we sometimes comment on lines ourselves, just like a heads up for the reviewer. Like, I know this can look strange, but I did this because of something. Which can shorten discussions.
Leave some comments in the code that explains why it's done in some way. And yeah, I think it's important that you mentioned that to describe why, not how, because how it's written, what's written there, is visible in the code. I mean, it's the source of truth. But why? It's not in the code. You can only see how it's done.
You could generate the how with AI, like a summary, but it's not really the point. The point is to give some extra context, not what is already there, but in different words.
Exactly.
Yeah, maybe one other tactic is draft PRs. So you can just, if you have some very rough idea, especially if it's something experimental of something your team didn't do before, I would create a draft PR and very, very quickly in a sloppy way, and then share with everyone and ask them to give me some first impressions.
Especially if you discovered something unexpected in a PR. So remember, don't surprise the reviewer. So, and if you feel that, okay, this may surprise somebody, it's a good place for draft.
This works only if you have this early feedback culture. If you can get someone's comments in 15 minutes, I think it's way better to discuss it early. Because if you go deeper into this, then you have more to rework if they have some insights. And if you ask them early, it's even better to have some quick meeting to align and agree and then just implement.
It's also connected with this idea that as you are working as a team, not as a set of individuals. Yeah. So you collectively care about this draft. And
but this needs this schedule in place, because if you will wait 2 days for our draft PR review, then it makes zero sense.
Exactly. And I think it's actually something pretty important to touch on. So what are the tactics to accelerate review cycles? Because I think it's requirement for most of the things that we mentioned. So if your review cycle is slow, it doesn't make sense to split your PRs to smaller PRs, because, okay, if you are creating 10 smaller PRs and you are waiting for them for 1 week, it's it's not a big difference between
You will
making
just
one big
stack
PR.
PRs needlessly.
Yeah, probably in this case, it's better to not split PRs and have big PRs that nobody will really review or create 200 comments. Probably it's better than having 10 PRs like that, unfortunately. So I think this accelerating review cycles is key here, and keeping this cycle time small is also critical. So one of the most important things and mindset to learn is that making review we should prioritize making review basically. So it's pretty compatible with the lean Kanban approaches. So basically the idea is that you should prioritize work to be done. So if you have something that is close to be done, PR, this is work that it's almost done, let's say, you should prioritize that and try to get it out of your board, let's say, as soon as possible. And it's simple idea, but again, very, very important.
So I guess higher priority than code in progress because it's closer to production.
Exactly. So obviously, it requires some context switching. So if you're working on some feature and you see that there is some PR to be reviewed, obviously you probably shouldn't, like, if you're working on something, jump straight into that and review that. But maybe there is some person that finished the job and this person job and can jump in this PR.
Yeah, so context switching can be a problem, probably for some people more than for others. But you probably don't work 8 hours looking at the code anyway. I mean, writing.
You are not. We'll need to talk about after that.
Maybe you're supposed to, but
we'll talk after recording about that. But jokes aside, yeah, and I think it's going back to the knowledge sharing. So we covered this knowledge sharing multiple times, and I know that some people are, why we need knowledge sharing? And this is actually a great example why it's important, because if you don't have only one person that is able to review your PR, but entire team can do that, you don't need to wait for this one person. You can probably have one person that finished his work or her work and can look into this PR, and it's making this acceleration working, basically. If you have only one person that can review your PR, obviously it's making the cycles much longer because only this person, multiple stars on the sky need to go into a special
line.
Yeah. So
and the end result is this cool flow of PRs going smooth from code to production.
Yeah, so basically,
it's a great feeling to have.
Yeah. So basically, you can work on something in the morning, and by the end of the day, and you're not working for 18 hours, and it can be merged within this day. So, but again, it's important mindset shift because I know it's natural to focus on your job to be done, but again, try to focus on finishing work and work as a team, not set of individuals.
Yeah, and that's like a culture thing. So not easy to change, but yeah, helpful to have in place. There's also this kind of controversial topic of metrics. So there are many tools that let you connect to your GitHub and let you track things like average PR size, cycle time, time you review, and so on. And they can be useful. I think the thing is there's a risk that someone uses them for measuring performance. That's probably not a good idea because people will start gaming them, and that's not what you want. Especially if you try to compare teams using them or something like that. Not recommended. But if you can use it inside the team for insight on, or maybe to find some outliers. If you have one or two huge PRs in one iteration, you can ask yourself why this happened. Maybe it was okay. Maybe we could improve something.
But I think it's also important to set expectations. So we said that, okay, in this ideal world, you are starting on the morning, merging it by the end of the day, but also to set expectations. In our teams, it also wasn't like that for every PR. So it was probably for 80%, sometimes 70% of PRs. But I think it's enough. I mean,
so target is not perfection, right?
Yeah.
It's just that most work goes like this. Sometimes there will be some crazy refactor that you need to do at once. Okay, maybe it's fine.
Sometimes you probably should reflect that, okay, why this took longer, what we can do to improve that, and try to do some kind of continuous improvement. As we already saying about fancy Japanese words, kaizen.
Yeah, so it can be a good starting point for retrospectives discussion.
Yeah, I remember that when we were really into optimizing that, we on the retrospectives were looking on these outliers and discussing, okay, why this PR took, for example, 3 days, for example, to be merged. And okay, is this something that we can improve here? Okay, this PR was like that because I don't know, it was some unexpected complexity there, and okay, it happens. Probably we couldn't do much about that. It's fine. Or maybe we can see sometimes, okay, we didn't spend enough time on planning here. Maybe we can, for example, next time plan more about this because this, and yeah, just improve.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is a skill. So if you work in such an environment for a longer time, you will also learn what things are worth to do deeper planning and worth when it's just not productive.
Yeah.
Oh, we have some comments. So, hi guys, I came late. I have concern. How could you create small PRs if you are working on tickets and maybe the tickets has complex tasks? How do you recommend doing small PRs in those cases?
Complex task. Yeah, if you can follow up what you mean by complex, but two things we mentioned before. So one is splitting the ticket into smaller tasks, but by vertically by the product features.
Maybe it's the situation when you have tasks from somebody up and you are basically implementing the tasks that you are receiving from some product owner somewhere that is planning your work.
Oh yeah, right. I didn't consider this because it can be like this.
So I think root cause, if I understand it properly, the root cause is probably that some person is planning your work. As long as I get it properly, but I think it's the root cause. I mean, it shouldn't be processed like somebody is giving you tasks that you should implement and deciding on how to split that. It should be probably the opposite. So you should discuss with this person, okay, what we have to do. So you should actually receive the problem that is to be solved, but not tasks to will be implemented, basically. And it should be some collective process to agree how to do that. Unfortunately, I know it's not possible in all companies, and it's sometimes impossible to change. And in this case, change.
No, if you can split it, you could try mob programming, I guess. That's one idea.
Or maybe just split it internally, so you can have one task from somewhere else, do process yourself to split to multiple smaller tasks, and just have smaller PR. So we already mentioned it a bit earlier that you can merge code that is not functional yet. So it's maybe not in the so it can work in the background, or maybe not. You may have some functions that are implemented but are not included in the how to say it, into the production process, let's say. And in the last PRs, for example, you can have multiple PRs, and in the last PR you can integrate everything.
Exactly.
So and in the meantime, you can also, if something is much more complicated, you can also do the
it's kind of what you mentioned before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can, just because a task is complex, it doesn't mean you can't split it into small PRs. You you can have the scaffolding first, and then you can use feature flags to deploy some dead code to production before you start using it. I'm not sure if you've listened the entire episode, but we mentioned this before.
But yeah, the downside is that, again, it requires entire team to kind of commit to this approach, because if you have long review cycle and you have many smaller PRs, it may be just blocked too long. You will not see benefit of that. And I also wanted to share that, okay, if you are splitting such tasks in more smaller tasks, you can, if it's more complex, you can also run shadow mode before the last merge. So you can run new code along the old code and compare if this code is creating the same result without storing it to the database or something like that. So sometimes you may be doing some bigger refactoring or something like that, and like to ensure, so maybe you have some tests for that you see that, okay, it's passing, but sometimes you would like to also compare on the production if it's working as previously, but without breaking anything. So you can run two functionalities alongside within one service and just compare result at the end. Run it for a week, month for a really complex one. And if you see that, okay, results are consistent and it's working nice, you can just swap that. So it's for much more complex tasks. Okay, so I was right. So the case is that tasks are assigned to me and the tasks have goals. In some cases, I need to make changes in several repositories and maybe I need to touch several files at once. So yeah, in this case, I'll say that this is probably on the pattern that tasks are assigned to you. In my opinion, it should not work like that. So
yeah, but what can you do in this situation?
Yeah. So as I said, so unfortunately, in many companies you cannot really change that. So the thing that you can do is you can split this task internally, and again, it depends on the team. I know that sometimes it may be hard, like change entire team culture to smaller PRs, because okay, maybe you can split your tasks into smaller tasks and try to have smaller PRs, but if nobody will look in your PRs and it will be no teamwork, because okay, I assume if tasks are assigned to you, it may be problematic because you are not collectively working on that. It's your responsibility and it's harder to actually integrate with that. So yeah, sometimes unfortunately it's a bit hard to change company culture.
Yeah, but we can still do it at least on the technical side.
And I would say that, okay, sometimes it may be hard, but not impossible to change that. I mean, we've seen sometimes in our life that the company culture was super hard to change, but if you push really hard, you can also do some positive changes. So.
But if you can do it also on the technical side of things, right? Like you can focus on the logic first and then implementation details, or the other way around. So at least like the reviewers don't need to have the full context in their minds at the same time. They can do it in parts, which will be much easier.
Yeah.
So there's some impact you can still have.
So yeah, we recommend checking what we've mentioned a bit earlier. So we have multiple strategies, and yeah, hopefully it will help. And again, try to change maybe something in your team. Maybe it will be possible.
So good luck.
But yeah, I think also don't be demotivated that it's so bad, because from our experience also in the teams, when you need to do these changes and you need to push hard to do that, actually you can learn a lot, because it's not like just, oh, let's do it like this and everybody's happy. Yeah, it's like, it's too easy. When you are in the team that you need to really spend a lot of time to convince your product owner, rest of the team for that, it will be hard. But if you succeed, it will be much easier in the other teams, and it's useful skills. So.
If you won't succeed, just change the job.
Yep, it's the last resort, but often works. And if you will succeed in this team, it will be also something nice to get a better job earlier. I mean, if I heard such stories like, yeah, I worked in a team when tasks were assigned to me and I convinced the product owner to spend time together to split tasks, and I convinced my team to split work into smaller, it was always like, okay, nice. It's so you know what to do, and it's also hoping to join nicer teams later. So, it's also a nice opportunity. You should try to see it in this way. So, all right. Other alternative that I have in mind that you can solve problem of big PRs is YOLO.
What do you mean?
I see big PR, I close my eyes and legit to me, let's merge that.
It was good, yeah.
I know that many teams or people use this tactic, and it can also work in some places. I mean, let's imagine that we're in a team and I know in some company that is fighting for survival, and the long term in this case of company is 6 months, and if they will fail, they will just fail and it will be closed. So obviously you probably don't need to care that much about long-term maintainability because long-term may not exist basically. But if you are in a more mature company or you are not starving, trying to survive, and you know that, okay, maybe you are building these features and it's very likely that it's not the final phase of this feature and we will need to change them. It's pretty likely if you are working startup, because very rarely the idea that you have at the beginning survives multiple iterations. So basically you need to be able to iterate quickly. In those cases, probably YOLO mode is not the best mode.
Yeah, so it's a bit like we discussed in the first episode when to write low quality code. So sometimes it makes sense, but you need to consider if you are in this place or not.
So I think it's also connected to using some, so basically this episode and using some good practices. So basically to skip some good practices, you need to understand what this good practice is giving you and what skipping this good practice will get out of you.
If it's worth in the short term to drop some, if it's long in the long term to drop some good practice in the short term. Like code reviews.
Yeah. Because, maybe just one person can work on some functionality for 1 month and, just rush that. And because there is some tight deadline or whatever, fine. But it's not for free. You will need to pay it back if you will need to extend this functionality, because the rest of the team will have no idea how it's implemented. And if only one person implemented that, probably it's also not the best implementation in the world. And it's very similar in case when you have YOLO code reviews. So you're closing your eyes and legit to me, and let's merge that. So again, it's not like, you may notice that the name of this podcast is No Silver Bullet. So it's not like you should always do code review. Sometimes
if you work alone, you can't.
Yeah.
And unless you use AI.
Yeah. So
I think that's a good closing point to consider what makes sense in this particular scenario. And also what we mentioned before, try to be aware of the perfection trap. Don't go too far into, don't take the metric too seriously, and don't say something like, we don't accept PRs above 500 lines ever. It's like, don't make it a hard limit or something like this.
But I think it's also important that if it's happening too often, it's also good to have some pushback like, sorry mate, but I think it's pretty big, and maybe you can spend some effort on splitting that, because often when you have big PR, it could be split, and it's not that hard really. So
especially if you have something like, you have a feature and then you are a good scout, so you consider, I will just refactor this a bit.
Rename one function that is used in 2000 places in the project.
So this is the perfect scenario where you can just split it to a separate PR. So you don't mix the context. It's
probably 5 minutes to make a separate PR out of that.
It will help a lot for the reviewers, because they don't mix the context of refactor with the actual changes.
I think it's actually what you said. It's very important. If you're doing refactoring, don't mix it with implementing new functionality, because it's very, very hard to actually distinguish that. Because if you're doing refactoring and keeping the functionality working as earlier, it's much easier to read because you're just focusing on one thing. And if you're changing functionality and doing refactoring, it's much, much harder to spot actually what is part of refactoring and what is part of new functionality.
It probably helps if you learn a bit of Git, so you're comfortable, branching out of a branch, which in this case is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
It's not super complex, but I know many people are intimidated by Git.
Mm-hmm.
But stacking PRs is sometimes great help. If you, instead of one huge PR with many mixed changes, sometimes it's easier to create 3 separate PRs branching from each other, which is a bit of work to do, not like a huge amount, but for the reviewers it will be much, much easier to review.
Yeah. But also try to avoid that, because if you're branching out of the branch, it means that you probably have problem with some basics, like you're waiting for too long for the review.
Yeah, but sometimes even if you wait 4 hours for a review, so it's the same day, it makes sense to branch out so you can work on something next.
It's not that big, yeah. But
I mean,
it's also
probably not the default for everything, but I think it's if you're not comfortable doing it, then you will be trapped, because you will wait for a review and you will think, okay, I can't work.
But there is also one trap, that if you try to start to work on next functionality that is branched out of that, and you will receive review, it may make the review cycle slower, because you will need to context switch back to that. Sometimes it may be better to do and make a coffee 2 or 3
4 hours.
Yes. But again, as we said earlier,
leave early.
yeah. But again, as we said earlier, so it's often, so there are multiple things that you need to join to get this good fast review cycle, and it's making much better effect at the end when you just have multiple good practices that we mentioned, and it really flows. So
yeah, this is a great place to be in when the work just goes straight to the production.
And again, if somebody is telling you that implementing functionality and merging it within one day, it's just in the books on the conferences, it's not really. It's possible to do. It requires effort. It requires high team code review culture, but it's possible and it's really worth. And I really hope that everybody who is listening for that will be able to work in such team. We did that, and it was just super cool, and to feel this work flowing and see how fast we're able to implement things. So
I think it's like one of the top experiences you can have in a team.
Yeah. Now we are actually 2 in our teams, so it's a bit also easier because we can just
still applies though.
Yeah. So obviously it's a bit easier to do when we're 2, but
but it's more tempting to create big PRs, so we need to watch out anyway.
Yep, we also do it from time to time. So don't be perfectionist. So I would say 80%. So try to aim for 80% of PRs to be merged within the same day. It's possible to do, but also don't probably 100%. It will be hard, but try to learn from those PRs that are not merged within this time box. All right, so I think we are out of the topics, so it will be time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please leave them on the chat and we'll be more than happy to answer them. Also, one small announcement. So if you are longer with us, and if you're in our newsletter that we highly recommend, we mentioned that we'll be dropping the live from our podcast. So in other words, we'll pre-record episodes because it's a bit hard sometimes to organize everything.
And as you can see today of our overheating camera.
Yeah, exactly. And as also you may noticed 1 week ago when we were not able to be live because of some sick leaves, etc. So, and also, it's not super easy to actually record it live because we need to think really quickly, probably too quick for us, and it's not that easy to keep this slow. So, and for podcasting platform, we are doing edits, and it's easier to listen for that. But in the YouTube, the version that is staying there is the live version, basically. So there are some pauses, so it's a bit.
But it was a fun experiment. We did 10 episodes.
Definitely.
I think we want to come back with live format, but probably something more interesting than just talking. Maybe some coding or something like that.
If we will have time.
Yeah.
So we cannot promise, but we'll also run some AMA sessions from time to time. So the next one in the next week. We should put soon to the description, or maybe I will do it now. So I will put to the link to the form for AMA questions. So I will put it to this episode's description now. We'll also cover some questions that we have
in the comments.
In the comments on YouTube. Yes.
Yeah.
I will just put it to the description now because I may forget. Can I edit it? What else?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you for joining the last live episode, for now at least.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for the comments.
Yeah, we'll see each other next week in the AMA episode. And later we are doing some short summer break because it was actually pretty intensive now or a bit longer.
Yeah.
And yeah, we should be back after summer with some other updated podcast things.
Form, yeah.
Form, yeah. So we'll have some more surprises, but you'll see after vacations.
Cool.
Right, cool. So I think we are done for today. So remember to leave some comments if you have under the video. Leave thumbs up so the deadly algorithm will like us more. Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and every
YouTube
application that you are using.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
See
you next time in a week. Bye.
Bye.